The annual stockholders meeting will begin in 5 minutes. Good morning, and welcome to the 2022 Annual Stockholders Meeting of Ayala Corporation. We will begin with the Philippine National Anthem.
Tumayo po tayong lahat. Ilagay ang kanang kamay sa ating dibdib at sabay-sabay po nating awitin ang ating pambansang awit.
Bayang magiliw, bernas na sinamana, alam na puso, sa dibdib mo'y buhay. Lupang hinirang, luyang ka ng magiging, sa manlulupi, di ka masisingit, sa dagat at bundok, sa siwi at sa langit mamuka, may nilagang tula at angin sa pangalan pinahal, ang kisap ng at mo'y tagumpay na napiligid, ang bituin at araw niyang kanyang kamay ni magdidilim, lupa na araw na ating pagsinta, buhay langit sa piling mo. Aming ligaya rapat, may nakaapit, ang mamatay ng alis sa'yo.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Chairman of Ayala Corporation's Board of Directors, Mr. Jaime Augusto Zobel de Ayala.
Thank you very much. Good morning to everyone. Thank you for joining us here today. The meeting will now come to order. It's my pleasure to welcome our stockholders to the 2022 Annual Stockholders Meeting of Ayala Corporation. As we do every year, we look forward to this opportunity to engage with everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Pursuant to our bylaws, our board and management decided that this meeting would be conducted in a fully virtual format. We chose this format given the situation of the COVID-19 pandemic at that time and the utmost importance that we place on the health and well-being of our employees, our stockholders, and of course, all our partners. Of course, in whatever format we hold our stockholders meeting, we do everything to ensure that our stockholders can freely exercise their right to vote and to be informed. Our stockholders may vote using the electronic voting in absentia and shareholder system until the end of the meeting, and questions may be sent to corporate secretary at ayala.com.ph. Joining me in this meeting as presenters are Fernando Zobel de Ayala, our President and CEO, Alberto M. de Larrazabal, our CFO, Solomon M. Hermosura, our Corporate Secretary, Celeste Jovenir, our Head of Investor Relations, our independent directors, namely Antonio Jose Periquet, Chairman of the Corporate Governance and Nomination Committee of our board, and Risalina G. Mantaring, Chairman of the Audit Committee of our board. Also joining me today are our directors, Delphine Lazaro, Keiichi Matsunaga, and Cesar Bonconsing. And our new nominees for directors, Mrs. Chua Sok Kung and Cesar V. Purisima. Our group management committee members, Rene Almendras, President of AC Infrastructure, Fred Ayala, who leads our initiatives in education, Paulo Borromeo, President of AC Health, PG Limcauco, President of BPI, Ernest Koo, President of Globe Telecom, Bobby D, President of Ayala Land, Eric Francia, President of AC Energy, Ruel Maranan, President of Ayala Foundation, Art Tan, President of AC Industrials, and Paco Milan, our Strategic Advisor for Human Resources and Chair of our Ayala Group HR Council. And our other officers and the representatives of Sisip Gores Velayan Company, our external auditor. Before we proceed, let us establish that this meeting is duly convened. Mr. Secretary, have the stockholders been duly notified of this meeting?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. On March 25, 2022, we distributed to our stockholders of record as of March 15, 2022, the notice of the annual stockholders meeting and the definitive information statement in 3 ways. First, by email to all stockholders with email addresses on record. Second, by posting on our corporation's website. And third, by disclosure to the Philippine Stock Exchange. In addition, the notice was published on print and online on April 7 and April 8, 2022 in the Manila Bulletin and the Philippine Daily Inquirer. Accordingly, our stockholders have been duly notified of this meeting in accordance with our bylaws and the rules of the Securities and Exchange Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Do we have a quorum at this meeting?
There is a quorum for this meeting, Mr. Chairman. Present in this meeting are stockholders owning at least 665,038,240 shares, representing 76.47% of the 869,703,615 total outstanding shares. They are present through their appointment of the chair as proxy or participation by remote communication or in the live webcast of this meeting or by voting in absentia. The breakdown of the stockholders present in terms of mode of attendance will be reflected in the minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Though we're holding this meeting in a virtual format, we have strived to provide our stockholders the opportunity to participate in the meeting to the same extent possible as an in-person meeting. Our Corporate Secretary, Mr. Hermosura, will now share the rules of conduct and voting procedures for this meeting.
Mr. Chairman, the rules and the procedures are set forth in the information statement and in the explanation of agenda items that we provided the shareholders as part of the notice of this meeting. Please allow me to highlight the following points. Number 1, our stockholders may send their questions or comments to corporatesecretary@ayala.com.ph. Number 2, Ms. Celeste Juvenir, our Head of Investor Relations, will read the questions or comments received before 9:30 a.m. today during the Q&A period, which will take place after other matters under item 9 of the agenda. Management will reply to questions and comments not taken up during the meeting by email. Number 3, as indicated in the ballot, there are 6 resolutions proposed for adoption by the stockholders in this meeting. Its proposed resolution will be shown on the screen as the same is taken up. Number 4, stockholders could cast their votes on the proposed resolutions and in the election of directors beginning April 1, 2022 until the end of this meeting through our ASM voting and registration portal, which is named Voting in Absentia and Shareholder System. Number 5, and finally, we have tabulated the votes cast as of April 22, 2022 after the end of the proxy validation process. Those votes are from stockholders owning 665,028,260 voting shares, representing 99.99% of the total voting shares represented in this meeting and 81.13% of the total outstanding voting shares. I will be referring to the results of this preliminary tabulation when I report the voting results throughout this meeting. The results of the final tabulation with full details of the affirmative and negative votes and abstentions will be reflected in the minutes of this meeting. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The next order of business is the approval of the minutes of the annual stockholders meeting held on April 23, 2021. An electronic copy is available on the website of the corporation. I'll now ask our secretary to present the proposed resolution and the voting results on this item.
Mr. Chairman, management is proposing the adoption of resolution number S-01-2022 for the approval of the minutes of the annual meeting on April 23, 2021. The resolution is shown on the screen. Stockholders owning 665,022,489 shares or 99.99% of the total voting shares present in this meeting have voted in favor of resolution number S-01-2022. Therefore, the resolution has been approved.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. The next item in the agenda is the annual report, which consists of the message from the chairman, the report of the president, and an audiovisual presentation. If you'll please allow me to first deliver my pre-recorded message. Thank you. Fellow shareholders, more than 2 years since the global health and economic crisis instigated severe and unrelenting disruption to the world, we've seen how people and institutions have swiftly adjusted, recalibrated, and collaborated more openly as the world transitions into the endemic phase. The global economy saw a recovery in 2021 from a sharp contraction in 2020. Similarly, in the Philippines, multi-sector inoculation efforts and the ability of both enterprises and consumers to pivot against the disruption mitigated the impact of the lockdowns. The gradually improving economic indicators have been encouraging, with imports, a barometer of domestic demand, has started to recover. The private sector is resuming its investments, and our government is continuing a policy of aggressive spending. Overseas remittances remained resilient, while employment recovered significantly since the pandemic began. With these developments, we saw the domestic economy gradually recovering, expanding 5.6% in 2021 from a 9.6% contraction in 2020. For 2022, while the upward trajectory for the domestic environment is expected to continue, we are mindful of the impact of the ongoing geopolitical conflict in Europe on the country's overall recovery. The fundamental shifts taking place since the pandemic have created a need for economic adjustment. The Ayala Group has had to realign its strategic focus and develop new opportunities to galvanize our competitive advantage and adjust to the changing economic landscape. Beyond responding to the crisis and navigating through economic disruption, the Ayala Group has overweighted its attention on existing assets and capabilities that have thrived during the pandemic and renewed its efforts on new and emerging opportunities that can drive transformative, sustainable, and long-term growth. Over the past 2 years, we've seen 5 structural changes define consumer behavior and the overall business environment. These, in turn, have created shifting expectations from stakeholder groups, which have redefined our strategic initiatives across our businesses. First, the exit from hard lockdowns will boost consumer confidence and pave the way for a cyclical recovery. Second, the massive acceleration of digital adoption across different touchpoints has become ingrained in many Filipino consumers and will continue to change consumer behavior. Third, the systemic and global nature of climate change, inequality, and health issues have bolstered a heightened focus on businesses to adapt to green growth and a sustainable development strategy. Fourth, experiences from the pandemic provided the impetus to build a robust and resilient healthcare system. And fifth, the surge in e-commerce during the pandemic disrupted supply chain models, unleashing a need for capacity expansion in logistics as a piece of critical infrastructure needed to support economic recovery. Let me expand on each of these points. With a declining infection rate of COVID-19 and the easing of mobility to the least restrictive status, combined with significant vaccination coverage, has led us to expect a rebound in consumer spending. This will, in turn, drive businesses to resume investment spending to address pent-up demand. While Ayala Land and BPI are vulnerable to economic cycles, they are well positioned for a strong rebound as economic activity accelerates. Real estate and banking are expected to benefit from reignited consumer confidence and the resumption of discretionary and big-ticket purchases. Ayala Land and BPI are prepared for this resurgence and have planned for higher capital and investment spending for 2021 to capture the cyclical recovery. Connectivity became the lifeblood of Filipino consumers since the start of the pandemic. Many of them have adjusted to digital living and have quickly transitioned how they work, study, play, and access basic services such as financial services and healthcare. The pioneering efforts of Globe and BPI in digital transformation have cemented their competitive advantage as the pandemic catapulted digital finance to ubiquity almost overnight. Globe has been able to build up GCash to reach significant scale and financial sustainability. At the same time, Globe is transforming itself into a digital solutions platform by providing products and services beyond traditional telecom services to address the evolving needs of consumers and enterprises. Meanwhile, BPI is building on its own significant lead in its digital channels and wider reach from open banking. With the robust digital engagement it has achieved over the past 2 years, BPI is accelerating its technology investments for 2022. The systemic and global nature of climate change, inequality, and health issues have bolstered also a heightened focus on businesses to adapt to green growth and a sustainable development strategy. The pandemic has provided us with a preview of how a systemic occurrence can disrupt an interconnected world. This has reinforced the urgency of tackling risks that are systemic and global in nature, particularly the need to prepare for the effects of climate change, inequality, and health issues. In particular, COP26 has pushed the energy transition agenda from fossil fuels to renewable technologies and made it front and center of the corporate agenda. This has prompted a stronger demand for governments and businesses to adapt to green growth and develop sincere, sustainable development strategies. In response, governments, including ASEAN economies like Vietnam, the Philippines, and Indonesia, are making a big push towards renewables with enabling policies and regulations. This structural shift, coupled with the advent of new technologies around energy conversion and storage from renewable sources, provided the enabling environment for ASEAN to accelerate its renewable investments and be at the forefront of energy transition in the region. Since its inception in 2011, ASEAN has become one of the fastest growing renewable energy platforms in Southeast Asia and a core driver of Ayala's earnings and value. Experiences from the pandemic provided the impetus to build a robust and resilient healthcare system. Notwithstanding the recovery we have started to see, the country will still have to continue to manage the effects of the health crisis and prime itself to develop post-pandemic healthcare systems. The unprecedented level of health awareness from the pandemic is expected to boost healthcare expenditures in the country. We see this as an opportunity for greater private sector participation to help augment the capacity and efficiencies of our health system. Since the beginning of the pandemic, AC Health has been able to pivot and provide significant assistance to government in implementing its COVID response. It has helped provide isolation, testing, and treatment facilities, and has actively participated in the national vaccination program. In addition, with its presence in key components of the healthcare system, AC Health is helping fill the gaps to uplift the quality and access to healthcare for Filipinos. The surge in e-commerce during the pandemic disrupted supply chain models, unleashing a need for capacity expansion in logistics as a piece of critical infrastructure needed to support economic recovery. The rise of digital economy, taking place at a time of mobility restrictions, exposed challenges across supply chain models. Even with the lifting of hard lockdowns, e-commerce has sustained its strong momentum, driving greater demand for efficient and reliable logistics solutions. The country's logistics sector is historically fragmented, with challenges around efficiencies and costs that put a strain on both enterprises and consumers. Now, More than ever, transportation connectivity and the efficient flow of goods and services have become vital to the country's economic recovery and the long-term sustainable growth. As critical infrastructure, it is imperative that the country builds a strong logistics network that is at par with our ASEAN peers. We're excited to participate in the development of this industry through AC Logistics, which is building a portfolio of end-to-end logistics solutions to serve a growing demand across a variety of sectors. We promote the pursuit of delicate balance between growth and sustainability. As we continue to grow our businesses in today's fast-changing environment, Ayala remains keenly aware of the need to embed sustainability and shared value creation into our strategy. Being present across multiple sectors of society, Ayala's growth during these past years has also put into focus the progressive impact we need to make on our communities. It is in this light that we remain committed to our sustainability blueprint, anchored on the objectives of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Recognizing that this push should begin within the company, we aspire to inculcate a culture of accountability, of transparency, and responsibility at Ayala to promote the pursuit of this delicate balance between growth and sustainability. We always strive to achieve sufficient diversity of thinking across our board representation and have worked to create a proper combination of knowledge, of experience, and of expertise to guide management. With an increasing demand for companies to adhere to new ESG standards, we understand the need to always focus on revisiting our board composition and allowing transitions to take place at appropriate moments. I'd like to make a special mention of our outgoing members of the board, Mr. Antonio Jose Periquet and Mr. Keiichi Matsunaga. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Mr. Periquet during this period of transition for his strong engagement and invaluable insights across the many discussions and decision-making processes we have had on the board. He has always spoken his mind and was comfortable challenging conventional wisdom, using his many years of experience across a variety of industries. We are the better organization for his independent engagement. I'd like to thank Mr. Matsunaga for sharing his experience, his time, and his wise counsel all these years. He's also constantly worked to expand our business relations both in the Philippines and across Asia. He has also been an excellent business ambassador for Japan, a country who we value as a partner to the Philippines. We would also like to acknowledge our institutional relationship with Mitsubishi Corporation, which has provided strong support to Ayala over the past 48 years. As we work these transitions, we're pleased to announce the nomination of two distinguished individuals as independent directors. First, Mr. Cesar Purisima, who served as Finance Secretary and Chairman and Country Managing Partner of the Philippines' largest professional service firm, SGB & Company. And secondly, Mrs. Chua Sok Kung, Senior Advisor at Singapore Telecommunications, Asia's leading communications technology group, after having served as its Group Chief Executive Officer for 13 years. Mrs. Chua also serves on the board and holds advisory roles in various institutions of the Singapore government. We believe Mr. Purisima and Mrs. Chua will provide immense value and complement the existing expertise and strengths of our current directors. We look forward to welcoming them to our board. As we look to 2022 with guarded optimism, we're excited by the many opportunities that continue to appear for the group. Despite the headwinds of the past 2 years, the Ayala Group remains fundamentally strong and poised to build on the momentum of the country's recovery. I look forward to the continued partnership of our shareholders and all our stakeholders as we steer our institution to remain a progressive force in the economic and social development of our country. Finally, I would like to thank our board of directors for its guidance, our leadership and management teams across the Ayala Group for their deep commitment and engagement across many fronts, to our many business partners, and of course to all our customers for their continued trust and support. I now turn you over to our President and Chief Executive Officer, Mr. Fernando Zobel de Ayala.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to all our shareholders. Please allow me to present my report, which has also been pre-recorded. Good morning, fellow shareholders. The encouraging macroeconomic indicators in 2021 demonstrates how government, businesses, and consumers have adapted to the disruption arising from the pandemic. Despite the extended period of lockdowns resulting from surges in infections as a new coronavirus variant would arise, our economy managed to achieve decent growth, resulting in an overall improvement in the business environment. At Ayala, our diversified portfolio provides a natural mechanism to mitigate the adverse impact and capitalize on opportunities arising from the global health and economic crisis. Combined with a strong balance sheet and ample funding capacity, our portfolio has allowed us to ride out the unprecedented challenges of the crisis, adjust to the evolving landscape, and prime ourselves for economic recovery. We continue to do our part to help revitalize the country's economic activity. In 2021, we augmented our investment program across the Ayala Group, deploying 228 billion pesos in combined capital expenditure and investments, 36% higher than the previous year. A significant portion of this amount was directed towards the capacity expansion of Ayala Land, Globe, ASEN, as well as the investments made at the Ayala parent level. We have seen most of our businesses performing better on our second year into the pandemic. Ayala Land, BPI, Globe, and ASEN continued to be the core drivers of our earnings. While Ayala Land and BPI were the most vulnerable to the extended period of our hard lockdowns, both businesses adapted to the evolving environment. Despite limited mobility, Ayala Land was able to capture the fairly resilient demand in its residential business and stable office leasing segment. BPI, on the other hand, normalized its loan loss provisions as asset quality improved. In addition, it continued to leverage its digital leadership in banking, rapidly growing its digital ecosystem. Meanwhile, being well-positioned to unlock the value from the heightened focus on digitalization and decarbonization, Globe and ASEN sustained their stable performance during the year, leveling out the challenges in Ayala Land and BPI, which are highly sensitive to mobility restrictions. Further, gains from various initiatives we executed, including the strategic partnership with the Razon Group in Manila Water, the divestment of one of our thermal assets, and the entry of a new investor in Mint, supported our profitability in 2021. All these drove the 62% expansion in our net income to 27.8 billion pesos in 2021. In 2021, we mapped out a 3-point strategic agenda for 2023, as we viewed the disruption in the business environment as an opportune time to strengthen and recalibrate our portfolio and reposition ourselves for a post-pandemic economic recovery. Our portfolio consists of diversified businesses across 3 pillars: core value drivers, emerging businesses, and portfolio investments. Our core value drivers, Ayala Land, BPI, Globe, and ASEN, are established franchises that have captured the strong momentum in the Philippine economy over the past decade. We have emerging businesses in healthcare and logistics, where we intend to create a more meaningful presence to take advantage of the promising potential in these spaces. Finally, our portfolio investments, Manila Water, AC Industrials, AC Infrastructure, iPeople, and AC Ventures, enable us to participate in a variety of growing industries. The diversified nature of our portfolio has positioned us well to withstand the effects of the pandemic. However, with the changes in the business landscape, we're taking a close look at these investments to create a portfolio that can deliver sustainable value and impact in the medium and long term. Through 2023, we have committed to, first, support the continued expansion of our core value drivers, Ayala Land, BPI, Globe, and ASEN, which we believe are well positioned to take advantage of the fundamental shifts prompted by the pandemic. Second, scale up our emerging businesses, AC Health and AC Logistics, to create new sources of growth and value. And third, sharpen our portfolio with an increased focus on value realization to fund future investments and strengthen our balance sheet, targeting to raise $1 billion in proceeds by 2023. Let me expand on each of these points. The past 2 years has pushed megatrends, digitalization and decarbonization to the spotlight and are redefining the banking, telco, and power industries. In particular, BPI and Globe are benefiting from the accelerated digital adoption across many consumer touchpoints, establishing their leadership in digital finance in the country. BPI has rapidly grown the share of transactions towards online platforms as it strengthens its digital leadership in banking. It is introducing 7 digital banking platforms designed to serve particular segments, such as retail, corporate, microfinance, securities trading, SMEs, high net worth individuals, and the broad market. 4 of these 7 platforms are operational, while 3 will be launched within 2022. The bank has rapidly grown its digital engagement and propensity, with 58% of its client base enrolled in its digital platforms and 20% in active user growth. With an expanded digital client base, enhancements in the platforms, and new products and partners, fees generated from digital transactions grew 30%. Digital customers generate more than twice the revenue of a non-digital consumer across deposits, credit cards, loans, and other bank products, such as investments and insurance. Globe, on the other hand, continues to harness GCash as the #1 finance app in the Philippines and is now part of the daily routines of many Filipinos. In 2021, its registered users nearly doubled to 55 million. Its gross transaction value more than tripled from its 2020 level to 3.8 trillion pesos, exceeding its outlook of 3 trillion pesos. In addition, GCash has made significant headways in financial services across savings, lending, investments, and insurance products. With the scale it continues to build, GCash has reached positive full-year EBITDA and achieved profitability 3 years ahead of target. The massive success of GCash has clearly shown Globe's ability to seize opportunities in adjacent spaces where it can leverage the assets and expertise of its core telco business and transform itself into a digital solutions group. Aside from fintech, it has a growing portfolio of assets in health tech, e-commerce, and ad tech under its corporate builder 917 Ventures and corporate venture capital arm Kickstart, which are well positioned to serve the needs of both the B2C and B2B segments. On the core telco business, Globe continues with its aggressive network build to keep up with the strong demand and further boost the internet quality and coverage in the country. It has earmarked 89 billion pesos in capital expenditure for 2022. In addition, with both digital platforms poised to serve a huge unbanked population and contribute to the country's financial inclusion agenda, we are deepening the synergies between GCash and BPI. BPI is ramping up its presence in GCash with an array of its financial products now present in the platform. Moving on to another mega trend that is dramatically impacting our portfolio, decarbonization. ASEN is at the forefront of the energy transition by pivoting its generation portfolio towards 100% renewable energy and spinning off all its thermal capacity by 2025. Its subsidiary, ACE and Exor, was designated as the Energy Transition Platform, which will entail transitioning thermal assets into cleaner technologies. ASEN currently has a total of 3,300 megawatts of renewables capacity. This is expected to reach over 4,000 megawatts in 2022. As it aspires to be the largest listed renewables platform in Southeast Asia, ASEN expects to reach its goal of assembling 5,000 megawatts of renewables capacity earlier than its 2025 timeline. In addition, a first in the ASEAN region, ASEAN is adopting a framework called the Energy Transition Mechanism, or ETM, for the early retirement and transition of SL Tech by 2040, or 15 years ahead of its technical life. ETM is an innovative model which uses low-cost and long-term funding to accelerate the retirement of coal plants and develop renewable energy to replace them. Within the first half of 2022, ASEAN will launch a new growth strategy and targets for 2030. Meanwhile, while Ayala Land and BPI have been adversely affected by the pandemic, they are also well positioned for a strong rebound as hard lockdowns are lifted and economic activity fully resumes. In Ayala Land, despite the challenges from mobility restrictions, it saw sustained demand in its residential segment throughout the pandemic. For 2022, Ayala Land sees an overall improvement in demand, albeit still below pre-pandemic levels. It is targeting to launch 4 new estates located in the regions of Cavite, Batangas, Bulacan, plus 100 billion worth of residential projects. In commercial leasing, with the reduction of quarantine measures to the lowest level, Ayala Land expects improved mobility to drive higher foot traffic and tenant sales to its malls. In hotels and resorts, it is preparing for higher occupancy and patronage from business travelers and a return of in-person events. The relaxed flight restrictions are also expected to attract more local and foreign tourists to its resorts. In offices, we foresee stable operations to continue given their prime locations, driven by BPO and headquarter tenants. We also expect overall occupancy to improve as the workforce increasingly returns on site. With the improved health situation and favorable prospects for recovery, Ayala Land is budgeting 90 billion pesos in capital expenditures this year. Around half is allocated to the residential business, with the rest to estate development, land acquisition, and commercial leasing operations. In BPI, the bank views 2022 to be a recovery year. It anticipates elevated global and domestic inflation, which will lead to higher interest rates. It estimates the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas to raise interest rates successively within the year. With this, we expect the bank's loan growth to improve from the 5% posted 2021 to around 7% to 10% in 2022. This will be driven by strong growth across credit card and personal loans, microfinance, and corporate loans. On net interest margins, with higher interest rates expected to take place in the second semester, BPI sees a NIM expansion of 15 to 20 basis points. On non-performing loans, BPI expects benign NPL formation from the current 2.5% to a maximum of 3% NPL ratio. Overall, BPI estimates earnings growth this year of mid-teens, driven by higher revenues and lower provisions. This is despite an increase in operational expenses as the bank ramps up its technology spending. While we are priming ourselves for the reopening of the economy, we are mindful of the impact of the Russia-Ukraine conflict on domestic economic recovery. In particular, we're carefully monitoring how the surge in oil prices will affect domestic interest rates, inflation, and global supply chains. The second point in our strategic agenda is to build on our long-held tradition of business building to create new legs of growth from which we can derive future sources of earnings and value, while applying a disciplined approach towards capital allocation. We aim to establish a significant presence in healthcare and logistics, two industries that are undergoing critical transformation. Both industries are highly fragmented, making them ripe for potential industry consolidation. In particular, the pandemic has exposed the massive underinvestment in the country's healthcare system, the reason we entered this space. AC Health is scaling up its portfolio to take advantage of the momentum taking place around the healthcare ecosystem. We have so far allocated around 12 billion pesos in AC Health since 2015, to assemble a portfolio of assets in primary care and multi-specialty clinics, hospitals, retail pharmacy, pharma distribution, and telehealth. AC Health is also constructing the country's first specialty cancer hospital, which is set to open in 2023. We're now focusing on execution and on ensuring that the business achieves the desired scale and profitability. We expect AC Health to reach profitability by 2022 and nearly 1 billion pesos in net income by 2025. In logistics, the sector has always played a key role in the country's trade and economy. More than ever, the pandemic has exposed the massive underinvestment in the country's logistics sector. We intend to be an active participant in addressing these challenges. We have formed AC Logistics as Ayala's vehicle for developing and managing an end-to-end platform that has the capability to service the supply chain requirements for industries in growth markets. In November 2021, we signed an investment agreement to acquire a 60% interest in the Air 21 Group for 6 billion pesos. Among the top 5 logistics companies in the country, Air 21 has 8 platforms engaged in a broad range of logistics services, including express door-to-door service, international and domestic freight forwarding, warehousing, and waste logistics management. This opportunity will allow AC Logistics to have an immediate presence and end-to-end capability from a company with a strong brand and track record, solid market position, and revenue and income generating assets. We're awaiting regulatory approvals and completion of conditions precedents on the acquisition, with the financial close expected by the first half of 2022. Another initiative is in cold chain. AC Logistics forged a joint venture partnership with Glacier Mega Fridge, one of the largest integrated cold chain storage providers in the country, for the development of a cold storage facility in Cagayan de Oro City. The city is a trade hub of northern Mindanao, where large FMCG companies are also located. Construction of the facility is ongoing, with commercial operations expected to start by year-end. These platforms complement our last-mile delivery unit, Entrego, which experienced accelerated growth from the rise of the digital economy. Entrego has gained a foothold serving major e-commerce players in the country and has ramped up significantly over the past 2 years. The third and final point in our strategic agenda is to sharpen our portfolio with an increased focus on value realization to fund future investments and strengthen our balance sheet, targeting to raise $1 billion in proceeds by 2023. This is being executed through a combination of strategic partnerships and divestments of assets that are no longer strategic to our portfolio or do not meet the desired scale and profitability. As of March 2022, we have realized 61%, or around $614 million, from the transactions we have executed in ASEN through the sale of secondary shares to GIC and the follow-on offering, and from Manila Water through the sale of secondary shares to the Razon Group. We have also executed a property for share swap with Ayala Land, which involved transferring 5 of our assets to Ayala Land in exchange for primary common shares. Further, we have started the divestment of some of our passive investments in AC Ventures, which is an ongoing exercise. More recently, we divested our entire stake in the Muntinlupa-Cavite Expressway project to the Villar Group. To realize the remainder of our target, we're working on divesting our remaining thermal assets, our interest in the LRT-1, and some of our non-core businesses. We have so far reinvested around $360 million of the value realization proceeds into value accretive opportunities. Since last year, we have been taking advantage of attractive valuations to buy back Ayala and Ayala Land shares. Going forward, proceeds will be redeployed to fund other investments and pay down debt. We hope to improve our gearing level and evaluate our dividend payout in step with the growth of our businesses. In parallel with our strategic agenda, in October 2021, as our contribution to the global economy's decarbonization goals, the Ayala Group announced its commitment to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. We engaged South Pole, a leading project developer and global climate solutions provider that works with private organizations and governments worldwide. Together with South Pole, we are assessing and quantifying the emissions across our business units spanning the three scopes: direct emissions, indirect emissions from generation of purchased electricity, and all other indirect emissions across the value chain. Subsequently, we will develop a roadmap with targets aligned with science towards our net zero ambition. We expect to complete the roadmap by the end of 2022. We will regularly update our stakeholder community as we execute on key milestones in this long-term ambition. With the improving macroeconomic fundamentals, de-escalation of quarantine measures to the lowest status, and high rate of inoculation, we are hopeful that 2022 will be the start of our country's recovery. The Ayala Group aims to continue its investment programs, and for 2022, we have allocated up to 285 billion pesos in combined capital expenditure and investments to execute on the growth initiatives across our businesses. A significant portion of this amount was earmarked to support the growth initiatives of Ayala Land, Globe, and ASEM. At the parent level, our planned investments amount up to 24 billion pesos, which we have allocated for our emerging businesses, as well as opportunities for buyback and other potential investments. We are, however, mindful of the current geopolitical risk and its impact on our domestic economy, our recovery, and investment programs. As we continue to execute on this new growth strategy for Ayala, I would like to thank our Board of Directors for its guidance and strong engagement across our many endeavors, our management and employees for their extraordinary commitment, and our shareholders and all our stakeholders for their continued trust and support to the institution. For almost 2 centuries, Ayala has been committed to improving lives. We evolve with sustainable and meaningful innovations in response to business challenges while pursuing growth for our stakeholders. We evolve as we advance the greater good. We invite you to now watch our video.
We evolve as we drive change. Building transformative businesses that address pains and needs. We enable inclusivity and progress. Expanding opportunities for everyone. We constantly reinvent and innovate. Reimagining new paths towards sustainable growth. We fulfill our purpose. Caring for the environment. Creating lasting and meaningful impact. And empowering the greater good.
Thank you. I hope you all found that both the remarks and the video informative. If I could now ask the Secretary to present the proposed resolution on this item and the voting results.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Management is proposing the adoption of resolution number S-02-2022 for the noting of the corporation's annual report and the approval of the consolidated audited financial statements of the corporation and its subsidiaries as of December 31, 2021, as audited by its external auditor, CC Gores Belayo and Company. The resolution is shown on the screen, Mr. Chairman. I'm pleased to report, Mr. Chairman, that stockholders owning 664,441,718 shares, or 81.06% of the total outstanding voting shares and 99.91% of the voting shares represented in this meeting have voted for adoption of the resolution. Therefore, resolution number S-02-2022 has been approved, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. We now move to the next item in the agenda, which is the ratification and approval of all the acts of our Board of Directors and officers since our annual stockholders meeting on April 23, 2021 until today. Mr. Hermosura will explain this matter and present the proposed resolution together with the voting results thereon.
Mr. Chairman, our board and management seek ratification of all the acts and resolutions of the Board Executive Committee and other board committees which were adopted from April 23, 2021 until today. These acts and resolutions are reflected in the minutes of the meetings, and they include the approval of the amended bylaws, the constitution of a sustainability committee, the issuance of up to $500 million guaranteed and dated notes by its foreign subsidiary AYC Finance Limited, the guarantee by the corporation of $100 million social bonds issued by AYC Finance Limited under the International Finance Corporation Social Bond Program. The approval of the Ayala's Climate Ambition Plan, including the net zero commitment by 2050, the assets for share swap with Ayala Land Inc., the investment in a data center operating company set up by Globe Telecom Inc., the issuance of a fixed rate Philippine peso bonds, the amendment of the related party transaction policy, capital allocation and disbursement of funds to subsidiaries, treasury-related matters, declaration of cash dividends, call option exercise, director compensation structure, and matters covered by disclosures to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Philippine Stock Exchange. Stockholders' ratification is also sought for all the acts of our officers from April 23, 2021 to date, performed in the general conduct of our corporation's business or in accordance with the resolutions of the board, the executive committee, and other board committees, and to our bylaws. Mr. Chairman, we are showing on the screen resolution number S-03-2022. On the voting results, stockholders owning 664,245,354 shares, or 81.03% of the total outstanding voting shares, and 99.88% of the voting shares represented in this meeting have voted for the adoption of resolution number S-03-2022. Therefore, the resolution has been adopted, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. The next item in the agenda is the proposed amendment to the corporation's articles of incorporation. Mr. Hermosura will explain this item and present the proposed resolution together with the voting results thereon.
Yes. Mr. Chairman, on March 10, 2022, our Board of Directors approve the amendment of the third article of our Articles of Incorporation on the change of the corporation's principal office address from 32nd floor to 35th floor, Tower 1 and Exchange Plaza, Ayala Triangle, Ayala Avenue, Makati City, to 37th floor to 39th floor of the Ayala Triangle Gardens, Tower 2, Paseo de Rojas Corner, Makati Avenue, Makati City. We now seek shareholders' approval, Mr. Chairman, of the amendment of the third article through resolution number S-04-2022, which is shown on the screen. I am pleased to report, Mr. Chairman, that stockholders owning 665,022,489 shares, or 76.47% of the total outstanding shares, have voted for the adoption of resolution number S-04-2022. Therefore, the resolution has been adopted.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. The next order of business is the election of 7 members of the Board of Directors for the ensuing year. Mr. Antonio Jose U. Periquet, Chairperson of the Corporate Governance and Nomination Committee, will please explain this item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ayala Corporation recognizes the importance of having the right mix of directors in creating and maximizing long-term stockholder value. A well-balanced and diverse board with the necessary expertise, experience, and independent perspective, and that addresses the needs of the corporation, ensures proper performance of the board's role, particularly in determining strategy, guiding management, and managing risks. In turn, this assures the corporation's long-term sustainability in a dynamic business landscape. Guided by the foregoing, Mr. Chairman, and in accordance with our bylaws, revised corporate governance manual, and charter of the Board of Directors, the Corporate Governance and Nomination Committee of the Board has ascertained that the following 7 duly nominated stockholders, including the nominees for independent directors, can add value and contribute independent judgment to the formulation of sound corporate strategy and policies for the corporation, and are qualified to serve as directors of the corporation for the ensuing term: Jaime Augusto Zobel de Ayala, Fernando Zobel de Ayala, Delfin L. Lazaro, Cesar P. Consing, Rizalina G. Mantaring, Cesar V. Purisima, Chua Sok Kung. Ms. Mantaring, Ms. Chua, and Mr. Purisima have been nominated as independent directors. All the nominees have given their consent to the respective nominations.
Thank you very much, Anton. Mr. Secretary, may we have the results of this election?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, each of the 7 nominees for directors has garnered at least 647,913,985 votes. Given this, I certify that each of the nominees has received enough votes for election to the board, and that resolution number S-05-2022 has been approved. We are showing the resolution on the screen. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. We welcome our new directors, Cesar Purisima and Chua Sok Kun, and look forward to working with them on our board. I'd also like to take this opportunity to recognize and express our gratitude to the corporation's outgoing directors, Mr. Anton Periquet, Mr. Keiichi Matsunaga. Anton has been an independent director of the corporation since September 2010 and has served as member of the Finance Committee and the Corporate Governance and Nominations Committee. More recently, as chair of the latter, chair of the Risk Management and Related Party Transactions Committee, and member of the Audit Committee. Anton, of course, has also been the corporation's lead independent director since December 2020. His years of service in our board has been marked by his unique industry perspectives, high level of objectivity, and of course, deep knowledge of markets. The board and management of Ayala Corporation are deeply grateful for his leadership and guidance these past 12 years. Matsunaga-san has been with the Ayala board for 5 years, since 2017, and has epitomized professionalism and provided great counsel. particularly with his international perspective. He has provided us full support in the Executive Committee, Audit Committee, Personnel and Compensation Committee, Risk Management and Related Party Transaction Committee, and more recently in the Corporate Governance and Nomination Committee and Sustainability Committee. The board and management extends our sincerest gratitude to him for his full commitment and dedicated service. Again, please join me in expressing our thanks to Anton Tariquet and Keiichi Matsunaga and welcoming our new directors, Cesar Purisima and Chua Song-kun. The next item in the agenda is the election of the corporation's external auditor. For this, if I could request Mrs. Risalina G. Mantaring, Chairman of the Audit Committee, to please present.
The Audit Committee exercises oversight over the corporation's external auditor by, among others, assessing its integrity and independence and the effectiveness of its audit process. This is critical, given the key role of the external auditor in undertaking an independent audit of the corporation and in providing an objective assurance on the corporation's financial statements. Mr. Chairman, in the performance of this oversight function, the Audit Committee evaluated the performance of our present auditor, the firm of Sisip Gores Velayo and Company, during the past year, and the committee was satisfied with their performance. The committee and the board of directors have thus agreed to endorse for our stockholders' approval the re-election of Sisip Gores Velayo and Company as our external auditor for 2022 for an audit fee of 6,559,140 pesos, inclusive of value-added tax.
Thank you, Risa. Mr. Secretary, kindly present the proposed resolution on this item and the voting results.
Mr. Chairman, management is proposing the adoption of resolution number S-06-2022 for the election of the corporation's external auditor and the fixing of its remuneration. The resolution is shown on the screen. I'm happy to report, Mr. Chairman, that stockholders owning 660,781,689 shares, or 99.36% of the total voting shares represented in this meeting, voted in favor of resolution number S-06-2022. Therefore, the resolution is now approved, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Secretary, are there other matters that require consideration by the stockholders?
There is none, Mr. Chairman. If I may just mention that our stockholders were given the opportunity to submit proposals for agenda item, but we did not receive any. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. We will now address questions and comments from the stockholders. Our Head of Investor Relations, Mrs. Jovenir, will read aloud the questions and comments together with the names of the stockholders who sent them. As mentioned by Mr. Hermosura earlier, management will reply by email to questions and comments which are not taken up during this meeting. Thank you. If we could now turn to Celeste Jovenir so we can address the questions that have been sent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First question comes from Tom Ryan Ortega. What are your plans to improve gender diversity on the board?
Thank you very much, Mr. Tom Ryan Ortega. As I mentioned, I guess in my message earlier, we always strive to achieve sufficient diversity of thinking across our board. I think earlier this was also pointed out, and we've worked to create a proper combination of knowledge, experience, and expertise to guide management. But with an increasing demand for companies to adhere to new ESG standards, we understand the need to always focus on revisiting our board composition and allowing transitions to take place at appropriate times. I think that was mentioned earlier. As you can see, we have elected, we have had Risa Mantaring on our board on the gender side since 2020. And of course, we're delighted to have Ms. Sokun Chua join the Ayala board, and she was elected today. So that's changed, I guess, the balance, gender balance, at least in the Ayala Corp board. ASEN, one of our subsidiaries, has 5 female directors. Ayala Land has 2 out of 9. BPI has 2 female directors out of 15, and Globe currently has 1, although in the past it's had a better balance. So bottom line, we will do our best to continue creating the balance that is needed, but at the same time focus as well on the kind of qualities and skills that are necessary to give diversity to the board's opinion-making process. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next question comes from Maria Angelica Rapadas. She asks, how have your businesses been performing since the downgrade of mobility classification to alert level 1?
If Fernando, would you mind handling this?
Sure. Thank you for the question. At the macroeconomic level, we continue to see recovery in demand. Imports, which are a good proxy for domestic consumer and investor demand, have already exceeded the pre-pandemic level in 2021. If you look at household consumption, that grew by 4% in 2021, driven by the expansion of e-commerce and the recovery of mobility. Strong remittance numbers and declining unemployment have also contributed to the recovery of consumer spending. We expect a faster growth rate for consumption this year, as consumers will likely spend more on high contact services, given the improvement in the country's COVID situation. We've also seen recovery of the private sector. Most of the 30 listed companies that make up the PSEI are in line or even ahead of analysts' earnings expectations. Foreign direct investments have also recovered, growing about 54% in 2021, following a 24% contraction in 2020. If I could go through some of the different companies now. In Ayala Land, for example, the sales momentum in its residential segment was affected by the surge of Omicron cases in January, but we saw a good improvement in February and March. The construction activity has also improved, with operating capacity at 93% in March from about 86% in January. In the malls, foot traffic has improved to 77%, and merchant sales are now at 82% of pre-COVID levels as of April 2021. In the hotels and resorts, with the resumption of foreign travel into the country since February, the occupancy rate has now improved to 45% in March from 40% in January. In the offices portfolio, we're seeing increased market activity with new leases signed in the first quarter of this year. For BPI, total loans grew 7.3% in the first quarter compared to last year. Auto, personal, and microfinance loans have already surpassed end 2021 levels in this first quarter. Credit cards and housing loans are almost at end 2021 levels. And for credit cards, the bank sees retail spending returning, particularly from shopping, dining, and travel. From shopping and dining. The travel industry, however, has not yet fully recovered and gone back to the previous levels. In SME, the bank has seen loan releases increasing in February and March, which are expected to continue as the economy opens up. And on non-performing loans, BPI is so far seeing a decline in NPL ratios. In Globe, in mobile, we're seeing recovery in prepaid top-ups and revenues driven by increased mobility. In particular, it sees the return of active loaders who previously shifted to broadband while staying at home. Mobile data continues to see stable growth and will greatly benefit from higher public mobility, increasing 4G quality and wider 5G coverage in Metro Manila and key cities nationwide. And then finally, in broadband, Globe sees the work and learn from home trends to have a long-term impact in the form of hybrid work arrangements despite increasing mobility. With this, Globe expects demand for broadband services to continue.
Thank you. Thanks, Fernando. Celeste, do we have other questions?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. There's a question from Elma Ginto. How do you plan to achieve your net zero greenhouse gas emission ambition?
Fernando, if you wouldn't mind.
Yes, thank you. Since we announced our commitment to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, we have lined up the critical steps and milestones towards the development of the Ayala Group's roadmap with targets based on science. We partnered with South Pole, a leading project developer and global climate solution provider, to develop this roadmap. We recently completed a climate gap analysis for Ayala Parent and our core business units, Ayala Land, BPI, Globe, and ASEN, to properly assess the strengths and areas for improvement to achieve this ambition. A critical component of this roadmap is assessing and quantifying our emissions spanning the three scopes: direct emissions, indirect emissions from generation of purchased electricity, and all other material indirect emissions from across the value chain. Our core businesses are in the process of accounting for their respective GHG footprints. We are on track to complete the respective roadmaps of our core businesses by the end of 2022. We will be conducting the same process for the rest of our businesses, and we expect to complete the net zero roadmap for the entire Ayala Group by 2023.
Yeah, thank you. Celeste, other questions?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. There's a question from Antoinette Valdez. What other businesses are you eyeing for potential divestment?
Fernando?
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned in my report, we intend to realize the remainder of our $1 billion value realization target through a combination of strategic partnerships and the divestment of non-core assets that are no longer strategic to us or do not meet the desired scale and profitability. And as I also mentioned, we have so far realized $614 million or 61% of our target. And to achieve the remainder of the target, we're working towards divesting our remaining thermal assets, some of our passive investments under AC Ventures, our stake in LRT1, and some of our other non-core businesses.
Thank you. Thank you, Fernando. Celeste, do we have any other questions?
That was the last question received prior to cut-off time, Mr. Chairman.
Very good. Thank you. So if that is the last question, this really concludes this morning's proceedings, and we can move to adjourn the meeting. The link to the audio and video recording of this meeting will be posted on our website. Stockholders may raise any issue, clarification, and concern about this meeting within 2 weeks of the posting of the link by sending an email to corporatesecretary@ayala.com.ph. Thank you, of course, to all of you for joining us today as the economy picks up and we strive to recover from the effects of the pandemic. We also recognize the transformation that has taken place in the business landscape. There are new headwinds to face, but as we have proven over the past 2 years, we are equipped with the necessary tools of resilience, innovativeness, collaboration, and adaptability. We're poised and ready always to reinvent ourselves, rise to new challenges, and continue to transform lives for the greater good. Please continue, all of you, to take care, keep safe, and we look forward to having you with us next year. Thank you very much, and to the board, we will be moving to an organizational meeting with the board after this. But to everybody else, thank you so very much for joining us here today. Thank you.